The year is 2025 and a trade war is simmering. It is not over steel or cars, it is over the humble potato. In a move that shocked markets and kitchens across North America, Canada abruptly stopped its potato exports to the United States. This was not a quiet policy shift, it was a loud, defiant act. The flow of fresh potatoes, frozen French fries, and seed potatoes from north to south came to a sudden halt. For decades, this trade had been a quiet, reliable backbone of the food supply chain. Now that backbone has been fractured, sending tremors through both nations and leaving everyone asking one simple question: why? The decision from Ottawa was a direct response to escalating trade tensions. The United States, under a second-term President Donald Trump, had been telegraphing its intent to impose heavy tariffs on its neighbors. Rather than wait for the blow, Prime Minister Mark Carney's government chose to act first. They preemptively cut off the supply of one of their most crucial exports. This was a high-stakes gamble. It was designed to show that Canada would not be a passive victim in a trade dispute. It was a signal that the Canadian government was prepared to endure economic pain to protect its long-term sovereignty and trading independence from an increasingly protectionist America. The impact was immediate and profound. American states like Idaho and Maine, which ironically are famous for their own potatoes, rely heavily on Canadian imports during their off-season months. Supermarket chains, fast food giants, and restaurant suppliers suddenly faced a critical shortage. The complex, just-in-time delivery system that keeps American plates full was thrown into chaos. Grocery store shelves began to empty. Menus started to feature notices of limited availability. The potato, a staple food item that most people take for granted, was suddenly at the center of an international firestorm, revealing just how interconnected and fragile our modern food systems truly are. This crisis is far more than a simple agricultural dispute. It represents a fundamental shift in the relationship between two of the world's closest allies. The unwritten rules of neighborly trade have been torn up. The halt in potato shipments is a clear, tangible symbol of a new era of economic nationalism. It forces consumers, farmers, and politicians on both sides of the border to confront a difficult reality. The predictable and stable trade environment that defined North America for generations is gone. In its place is a volatile landscape where a simple root vegetable can become a powerful weapon in a geopolitical struggle for dominance and respect. President Donald Trump's reaction was swift, loud, and exactly what the world expected. He did not use diplomatic channels for his first response. Instead, he turned to his favored platform, Truth Social, to unleash his fury. He denounced Canada's move as nothing short of economic warfare. In a series of late-night posts, he accused Prime Minister Carney of betraying a loyal partner and promised that Canada would face consequences like never before. This was not just political theater, it was a clear declaration of intent. The president framed the potato blockade as a direct attack on American farmers and consumers, promising swift and severe retribution for this perceived act of aggression. The threats did not remain online for long. Within days, the White House announced its official plan for retaliation. President Trump proposed a sweeping 25% tariff on all Canadian agricultural imports, a move that would affect everything from maple syrup to beef. But he did not stop there. He threatened to escalate even further, floating a potential 35% tariff on all Canadian goods, set to take effect on August 1st. This was a maximalist approach, designed to inflict maximum economic pain. The administration also began openly discussing the suspension of the USMCA, the trade agreement that governs trillions of dollars in commerce between the United States, Mexico, and Canada, signaling a potential dismantling of the entire North American trade bloc. Behind the scenes, the Trump administration scrambled to turn these threats into policy. The president ordered an emergency review of all agricultural imports from Canada, searching for leverage points. He considered invoking the rarely used Agricultural Trade Act, a powerful piece of legislation that would grant him broad authority to impose restrictions without congressional approval. White House officials spoke of creating a new America First trade pact, a bloc that would pointedly exclude Canada and Mexico. This was more than a response to the potato issue. It was the potential start of a complete realignment of American trade policy, away from continental cooperation and towards aggressive isolationism. However, not everyone in the president's circle was convinced. Some of his own economic advisors reportedly urged caution. They warned that such broad and punitive tariffs could backfire spectacularly. They argued that these measures would inevitably lead to higher prices for American consumers, and could hurt United States farmers who rely on Canadian markets for their own exports. The internal debate highlighted a key tension in the administration's approach: the desire to project strength and punish an opponent versus the practical economic realities of a deeply integrated supply chain. The president, however, seemed determined to follow his instincts, setting the stage for a dramatic and costly confrontation. For the average American, the potato war is not an abstract geopolitical game. It is a tangible reality felt in the aisles of the local supermarket and at the drive-through window. The sudden cutoff of Canadian potatoes created an immediate supply shock. States in the northern United States, such as Wisconsin, Maine, and even the potato heartland of Idaho, depend on their Canadian neighbors to fill supply gaps, especially for processing-grade potatoes used in frozen products. Within a week, the effects began to show. Some of the nation's largest grocery chains started placing limits on purchases of frozen French fries and potato-based snacks. The limited availability warnings on food delivery apps became a common sight. The ripple effect quickly spread to the restaurant industry, which is a massive consumer of potato products. Fast food chains, the purveyors of the iconic American meal of a burger and fries, were hit particularly hard. Their business models are built on consistency, low costs, and a reliable supply chain, all of which were now under threat. The National Restaurant Association issued a stark warning, predicting significant price hikes for consumers if the dispute continued. Small independent restaurants and diners, already operating on thin margins, faced an even tougher choice: absorb the rising costs themselves, or risk alienating customers by raising their menu prices for a side of fries. The problem is not simply a lack of potatoes. The issue is the disruption of a highly specialized and efficient system. Canada does not just export raw spuds, it is a major supplier of processed potato products, from frozen fries to potato starch used in countless other foods. American food processors rely on these specific products, which are often tailored to their exact specifications. Finding alternative suppliers is not something that can be done overnight. Building new processing plants or retooling existing ones is a long and expensive process. This crisis has laid bare the hidden complexities of the modern food supply chain, showing how a disruption in one area can cause widespread and immediate problems elsewhere. In response, the Trump administration proposed emergency subsidies for American potato growers. The idea was to encourage domestic farmers to plant more potatoes and fill the gap left by Canada. However, critics were quick to point out the flaws in this plan. Farming does not work like a factory. You cannot simply flip a switch and produce more crops. Planting cycles are long, and the specific types of potatoes needed for processing might not be what American farmers are equipped to grow. The core issue remained one of supply chain logistics, not just raw production. For the American consumer, the message was becoming clear: get ready to pay more for one of your favorite foods. While Americans worried about the price of their fries, Canadian farmers faced a threat to their very livelihoods. Nowhere was this felt more acutely than on Prince Edward Island, or PEI. The small, picturesque province is a potato powerhouse, and its economy is intrinsically linked to its most famous export. For generations, PEI farmers have cultivated a reputation for high-quality potatoes, shipping them across the border to the lucrative American market. The numbers really do tell the story. Nearly 80% of the island's international potato exports, a trade worth a staggering $1.8 billion, are destined for the United States. The sudden closure of that border felt like an economic earthquake. The PEI Potato Board immediately sounded the alarm. They warned that President Trump's threatened 25% retaliatory tariff would be nothing short of devastating. Such attacks would make their products prohibitively expensive for American buyers, effectively erasing their largest market overnight. Farmers who had just invested in seed and equipment for the upcoming season were left in a state of shock and uncertainty. Warehouses full of potatoes meant for export suddenly had nowhere to go. The crisis rippled through the local economy, affecting transport companies, equipment suppliers, and seasonal workers. The mood on the island shifted from pride in their produce to deep anxiety about the future. In response to the growing crisis, the Canadian government in Ottawa pledged immediate support. Prime Minister Mark Carney's administration announced a package of emergency subsidies designed to help farmers weather the storm. They also promised funds to help the industry diversify and find new markets for their products. While these measures were welcomed, many farmers remained skeptical. Government aid could provide a temporary safety net, but it could not replace the stable, long-term demand from the U.S. market. The challenge was immense: how to reorient an entire industry that had been built over decades to serve a single, dominant customer. This was not just an economic calculation for the farmers, it was a deeply personal one. Many of these potato farms are family-run operations, passed down through generations. Their identity and their heritage are tied to the soil they cultivate. The trade dispute with the United States was more than a headline, it was a direct threat to their way of life. Potato processors across Canada, including giants like McCain Foods, began instructing farmers to plant fewer potatoes for the 2025 season, anticipating a prolonged slowdown in demand. This directive, while logical from a business perspective, was a painful blow to a community that takes immense pride in its productivity and contribution to the food supply. As the potato crisis deepened, Prime Minister Mark Carney and his government refused to sit idle. Instead of simply managing the fallout, they launched a bold and ambitious countermove. Just days after the export halt, Carney announced that Canada had signed a landmark multi-billion-dollar trade agreement with a coalition of major Asian economies, Japan, South Korea, and India. This was not a minor deal. It was a comprehensive pact that focused on expanding agricultural exports, fostering cooperation on digital infrastructure, and launching joint initiatives to combat climate change. It was a clear and decisive pivot away from Canada's traditional reliance on the United States. The deal was a strategic masterstroke designed to send a powerful message to Washington and the rest of the world. It demonstrated that Canada had other options and would not be held hostage by American protectionism. Analysts immediately began calculating the potential benefits, with initial projections suggesting the new agreement could boost Canada's GDP by as much as 1.2% in the next fiscal year. To support this pivot, the government also unveiled a new $25 billion export credit facility. This fund was created specifically to help Canadian businesses, from large corporations to small farmers, finance their expansion into these new and growing Asian markets. The reaction from Canada's new partners was overwhelmingly positive. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi hailed the agreement as a new chapter in Indo-Canadian cooperation, a significant statement given the previously frosty relations between the two countries. Leaders in Japan and South Korea similarly welcomed Canada's strategic shift, seeing it as an opportunity to strengthen ties with a stable, resource-rich G7 nation. For these Asian countries, the deal offered a chance to secure reliable supply chains for food and other essential goods, diversifying their own dependencies away from more volatile regions. Canada was no longer just America's northern neighbor, it was positioning itself as a key Pacific power. This strategic pivot has dramatically reshaped the political landscape within Canada. Prime Minister Carney, who took a significant risk by confronting the United States, has seen his approval ratings surge. The Canadian public has largely rallied behind his assertive stance, showing strong support for the government's efforts to forge an independent path. The move has been framed as a matter of national pride and economic survival. By turning a crisis into an opportunity, Carney's government has not only attempted to solve the immediate problem facing its potato farmers, but has also begun to fundamentally redraw Canada's place in the global economy for decades to come. The potato war has ignited fierce political debates on both sides of the border, exposing deep divisions on how to handle the new era of confrontational trade. In the United States, the Republican Party finds itself split. One faction, fiercely loyal to President Trump, has enthusiastically backed his hardline stance. They see the tariffs and threats as a necessary show of strength, arguing that America must stand up to what they perceive as unfair trade practices from its allies. They champion the America First doctrine, even if it means higher prices and strained diplomatic relations, believing that short-term pain is worth the long-term goal of reshoring industries and jobs. However, another wing of the Republican Party, along with many Democrats, is urging restraint. Lawmakers from agricultural states and those with close economic ties to Canada are deeply concerned about the consequences of an all-out trade war. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, a pragmatist known for his focus on economic stability, has publicly called for a bipartisan review of the nation's agricultural trade policy. These politicians are worried about food inflation hitting American families and the potential for Canadian retaliation to harm U.S. exporters. They argue that a diplomatic solution is essential to protect the economy from self-inflicted wounds, creating a tense internal struggle within Washington's corridors of power. In Canada, the political dynamic is quite different. Prime Minister Mark Carney's bold strategy has, for the most part, united the country. His decision to stand up to American pressure and actively seek new markets has been met with widespread public and political support. His approval ratings have climbed as Canadians rally around a narrative of national resilience and sovereignty. The opposition parties, while critical of the government on other fronts, have found it difficult to attack a policy that is proving to be popular. They can raise concerns about the risks involved, but the government's decisive action and the promising new Asian trade deal have left them with little room to maneuver. This unified front in Canada presents a stark contrast to the discord in Washington. While American politicians argue amongst themselves, the Canadian government is projecting an image of strength and strategic clarity. Prime Minister Carney is leveraging this unity to further his diplomatic offensive. He has announced plans to host a global trade summit in Vancouver, positioning Canada as a leader in the fight for sustainable commerce and food security. This summit is being framed as a direct counterweight to American protectionism, an invitation for other nations to join a coalition dedicated to open and rules-based trade, further isolating the Trump administration on the world stage. This conflict, which began over a simple vegetable, is now sending ripples across the globe, forcing other nations to watch, learn, and choose sides. European leaders in particular are observing the Canada-US dispute with intense interest. Many see Canada's predicament as a potential preview of their own future dealings with a Trump administration. German Chancellor Annalena Baerbock praised Prime Minister Carney's strategic clarity, suggesting that his proactive and diversification-focused approach could serve as a model for Europe. French President Emmanuel Macron used the opportunity to warn against the dangers of economic isolation, implicitly criticizing the American stance while applauding Canada's outreach. The crisis has become a real-time case study in how middle-power countries can navigate a world dominated by competing superpowers. Canada's strategy of building coalitions with other like-minded nations in Asia and reaching out to allies in Europe is being seen as a viable playbook for survival and even prosperity. The potato war is demonstrating that economic dependence on a single, unpredictable partner is a critical vulnerability. As a result, countries around the world are likely to accelerate their own efforts to diversify their trade relationships, seeking to build more resilient supply chains that are less susceptible to the political whims of any one nation. For ordinary people, this high-level geopolitical chess match will have tangible consequences. The immediate effect is a change in the price and availability of goods. Americans are learning that trade barriers can make their grocery bills more expensive. Canadians are learning that new markets can create new opportunities but also bring uncertainty. In the long term, these shifts could alter the very products we buy and the jobs we do. The globalized world, where goods flow seamlessly across borders, is being replaced by a more fragmented system of competing trade blocs. This could lead to less efficiency, but perhaps more stability for those within the right bloc. Ultimately, the potato war of 2025 may be remembered as a pivotal moment in modern trade history. It signals the end of the post-Cold War era of unchecked globalization and the beginning of a new, more competitive age. It has shown that even the closest of allies are not immune to profound disagreements, and that everyday items can become symbols of national pride and economic weaponry. How this conflict is resolved will set a precedent for international relations for years to come. It forces everyone, from presidents to potato farmers, to reconsider the true cost of our food, the nature of our alliances, and the fragile foundations of our interconnected world.